Welcome back to my series on learning how to create artwork using acrylic paint. In my last videos, I really focused on developing a free, expressive style with our paint and our brushstrokes, and I'll continue that style in the form of an abstract landscape painting. When we enter the world of the abstract, we really release ourselves of the restraints of creating a realistic artwork, and we enter the realm of creative. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily easier, because we will have to start thinking about stylistic choices and color choices and brushstrokes. What do we want to exclude from our image? What do we want to include in our image? What do we want to focus on? And how do we use composition, color, and technique to maintain that focus? And these are all important questions to ask yourself as we begin our landscapes. First, let's choose an image. I like to use this website called Unsplash, where I can find all different types of resource images for creative work. And this website, photographers share their work, and if you use their image in some sort of creative way, always give them credit in your social media captions or tags or websites. Or I will use a photograph from one of my own trips so that my painting remains as original as possible. The idea of this whole thing is not to copy the photo, but to use it to inspire your own unique creative choices. I will be using a photograph from the artist Alex Perfilio. Some landscape photos can have a lot of information in them, and I wanted mine to be a little bit more simple. I wanted to find something with a simple foreground and a clear subject, like this cactus. Then I wanted to have a nice mountain scene in the background. So I chose that based off of those things that I wanted in my painting. So find an image that has some clear designations of a foreground, middle ground, and background, which offers you a challenge, but it also doesn't overwhelm you with so many details. Now we need to choose a color scheme. So you're going to be choosing no more than 4 to 5 colors to work with. We really want to keep that to a minimum. And we're going to start making choices of what is going to go into our shadows, what is going to go into our middle values. I always stress to my students to write down the names of their actual paint color choices. They will be working on it for a few class periods, and when you're sharing a studio space, it can be really hard to keep track of those color choices, so it's good to get in that habit. Also, you don't have to choose the colors that are in the photograph that you chose. My students have a color scheme guide in their sketchbooks that we created in an earlier video that you might want to check out if you're having a hard time making these color choices. You can also search for other artwork on Pinterest to inspire your color choices. What I like to do on that site is to search for the word color swatch, and then you will see some really beautiful color harmonies that were chosen by other artists to inspire you. For this painting, I chose to use the realistic colors from my image, but increase their vibrancy and intensity to break from reality. It really already had some nice jewel tones in that color reference that I wanted to work with and pull out more. You can see that in the mountains I see purple and pinks that I increase the vibrancy with in my painting. In the ground, there are some neutrals which I chose to use a yellow ochre and a burnt sienna. I thought that would just be beautiful and really go off that jewel tone color scheme I'm working with. And I really loved the cerulean blue sky, so I kept that, and I also wanted to add some clouds in there to add some texture to that space. My next tip is to simplify your photo reference. We are not going to paint every shadow, crevice, and leaf that you see in the image. If we were doing a realistic painting, that might be the case. But in abstract work, we need to decide what to include and what to leave out of our reference image. First, it may be easier to turn your image into something that's black and white. This way you are less likely to try color matching, and you're more likely to focus on changes in value, like lights and darks. Next, you should trace your reference photo to show yourself the most essential shapes you want to include in your painting. I did this in Autodesk Sketchbook, an easy free app I use as a tool in my art classes. I turn down the opacity of my reference photo and I draw both lines on a separate layer, tracing what is absolutely necessary for my painting. Is there a shadow I want to include? Is there a shape I want to take out? What do I want in my work and what do I want to take away? I make all of these choices in creating this outline. You can also do this with a printed reference by printing it in black and white and using a Sharpie to create the outline. Some artists like to add a filter using a photo editing program to adjust the photo reference as well. I really love this idea and I use it all the time, just not in this particular current example I'm going to show you today. But here are some examples of filtered photos that would help you create a more abstract landscape. As you can see, the filtering of the photo allows you to break down shapes, chunks of highlights and shadows, and reveal textures to help inform your painting process. So, if you have comfortability in exploring filter features in a photo editing app, this is a great time to use those skills. Now I will use this simplified altered reference to lightly sketch out my design. I love to prep my canvas with a background color to work on top of instead of a blank white canvas. I find that this helps my colors act more rich and harmoniously. And I really like to use a white charcoal pencil to bring in my underdrawing. I do this because sometimes when my students use a pencil, the line can become really dark and you can see it underneath the paint layers. With charcoal, it's much more subtle and disappears underneath the paint. Acrylic paint needs layers to build up on. I always tell my students that the first layer is not complete. This is just where we lay down the colors inside of the shapes, and you're making your choices. What colors are different sections going to be? This is your first step, just blocking out different colors. I love to work background to foreground every time I use acrylic paint. This doesn't mean that once the paint is covering the surface, that the painting is finished. We have many more layers to add on top of this. Now that our colors have been dropped in, I will begin with adding light, shadow, and brush texture. For my mountains, I looked at how the light hit them. Where is there a highlight? Where is there a shadow? And where do I see a color change? I really love the swirly brush strokes of Impressionist artists, so I used those to bring movement to the brush strokes as I worked with the lights and the darks. When I'm looking at making stylistic choices, I love to look at how other artists have decided to make their own choices when painting a similar subject. So I'm going to show you a couple of paintings that I looked at when painting my mountainscape. You will also see throughout the process of my painting that I take a little squirt bottle with water in it and I spray on the surface that I am currently painting. This makes sure that my acrylic paint doesn't dry up and it leaves it activated so I can keep blending with my brush strokes. If you need more practice with this particular technique or brushstroke techniques, check out my earlier videos in this acrylic paint series where I really take time to talk about brushstrokes and talk about this specific paint and how to use it. Now I'm beginning to add the texture quality for my middle ground. This is where I have yellow ochre and burnt sienna colors. When I painted this, I wanted to have a flat brush quality and build up those brush strokes of the bushy plants by having some wispy kind of brush strokes added as well. You will see that I paint right over the cactus area, which I will eventually add on top of. This is why I stress the importance of working from the background to the foreground. If I paint my cactus and then I try to paint the background, I'm going to have to paint inside of all these teeny tiny negative spaces, and it's just going to add a lot more difficulty to your process. This kind of intuitive abstract work is best when we have lots of layers. When we are beginning painting, it is natural to think that coverage means completion, but with any art, there are so many small choices that need to be made, mistakes we need to work with, and perseverance through those challenges. This is what brings us to a sense of completion with an artwork. In this particular painting, you will see that I had to paint over my cactus multiple times before it really felt right to me. It drove me insane. And sometimes with acrylic paint, we have to repaint over something. So what I did is I made a mistake, I allowed it to dry, and then I worked back on top with texture. This drying in between allows us to build up opacity, and it also allows us to cover our mistakes. Acrylic paint dries really quickly, so use that drying time to your advantage. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it. Allow time to let it dry and cover it up. Add on top of it. When my brushstrokes went outside of the shape I wanted for my cactus, I let that dry, and then I went back into that area with the and added little dabs of purple for the mountains in the background to cover up those mistakes. These are the small choices that we make throughout the process of painting that really bring us to a sense of completion.